All right, so our next speaker is Jim Hall, going to talk about FreeDOS, keeping the community together for 30 years. Take it
All
away,
right,
Jim.
thank you very much. So my name is Jim Hall, and I'm talking about FreeDOS, which is a number of you are probably wondering, what is FreeDOS? What is DOS? A number of you I can see are about my age, so you're not wondering at all. But for those of you who are a little younger, let me talk about what DOS is and kind of where it came from. And so this is I actually went looking for a picture of the IBM PC 5150. This is an IBM PC AT, which is actually the one I spent the most time with right before I went to college. So I have like a special part of my heart is sort of going out to this one. Although I do actually know a friend of mine who wrote documentation for the original IBM PC 5150. He worked at IBM, and he was creating the documentation, and it was before they actually had a product. And so they literally had scratched 0001 on the number plate at the back of the machine. So this is what DOS was. This is how DOS ran back in the 1980s, 1990s. So DOS began in 1981 with the IBM PC 5150. And it was a text-based operating system. You can see here on the left-hand side, this is a typical DOS session, right? So I'm running the dir command, I'm doing cd to get in there, and I'm doing the dir command to see what's inside it. And then typically, you would use the command line to run applications. So here I'm running the edit application. And I actually, even though it had a very limited command line, it actually had a functional command line. And I actually enjoyed using the DOS command line. I was one of those guys that really, really liked using DOS. And I used it all the time when I was an undergraduate. I went to school. I was a physics student for my undergraduate degree. And all kinds of applications really made my university experience a lot easier. This is my favorite, even today, by the way, 2025, is still my favorite application. I see some nodding heads going, yes, yes. So this is a shareware spreadsheet called As Easy As. And it was, I see a couple people who got the joke, right? So it was created by Paris Helios and Dave, I'm forgetting his last name, who from Trius Corporation that made a spreadsheet that they released for free. Well, you could try it out for free, and if you liked it, you were expected to pay for it. It was some low-cost fee, and they did it because it was as easy as this other application called Lotus 123. So it's as easy as 123. Interesting story. I actually interviewed Paris. He said that they created this based on a demo from a programming language called Turbo Pascal. Which came with I see some nodding heads, right? Came with a spreadsheet application, and they turned it into a full-fledged spreadsheet because Paris worked for a company that did nuclear engineering, and he did nuclear accident analysis, and he was part of this multi-country team that investigated this little accident that happened over in Ukraine, over in Chernobyl. And it turned out that Lotus 123 couldn't analyze all the data. So they said, well, we'll just take this experiment we've been working on and we'll make it a full-on spreadsheet. That's where As Easy As came from. And so I used this all the time. It was like I spent most of my time in As Easy As, also various DOS word processors, right? And so the one on the left is a shareware word processor that I used throughout my undergraduate program. It's called Galaxy. Those of you who are curious what Word looked like back in then, there actually was a version of Microsoft Word, and that's the screenshot on the right. That's what Word looked like back in the 1980s, 1990s. Of course, you didn't have to use full screen applications, and I enjoyed using the command line, and it was just something I enjoyed doing. I would write a lot of my papers, a lot of my class papers I'd write actually in Galaxy, but if it was a scientific paper, I used MTech, which is a DOS version of LaTeX. And so you're actually seeing the LaTeX viewer, the MTech viewer on the right-hand side. Anybody happen to recognize, who's about my age, what the editor is on the left-hand side? It looks like BASIC. It's a basic, it's a very basic kind of editor, I'll say. It's Edlin. It's the best editor ever. It's Edlin. So if you want to know what Edlin's like, you can install Ed, the edit editor, on Linux, and you can get an experience with that as well. Although this compiles just fine on Linux. And so I also did a lot of programming, right? So as a computer science, or as a physics student, I did a lot of programming to do my analysis. And so one of the things that I did was, back then printing was on a dot matrix printer. And so you could fire up a dot matrix printer and print out your paper, but did it look right? Was it going to be right? It takes a long time to print. And so I actually wrote a virtual printer emulator that I could put data into and see what the output was going to look like at a rough mode, just to kind of see if my output was correct before I committed time to printing on a dot matrix printer. And so doing kind of programs like this was a great way to kind of extend DOS. I also did a lot of different command line programs, but these are little programs I would write for myself to kind of make DOS better. And I'm just trying to tell you how enthused I was, right, to run DOS back in the 80s and 1990s and trying to share that experience of how cool it was to write a program that didn't exist. And I also, as a physics major, I also have a math minor, and so in a class I took on chaos, writing little programs that would generate various chaos diagrams, and this is a very simple iteration of the Sierpinski triangle. And so this is the entire program. I mean, there's some stuff up above that sets up the screen and things like that, but this is actually what iterates to create the Sierpinski triangle. And that's what I loved about DOS. It was so easy. There was like nothing to really set up a virtual screen. It was a one-line thing to establish graphics mode. And then the rest of it is program. I mean, you could write this program in about 15 minutes. It's not a hard program to write. And that's why I liked DOS programming. And I did lots of little programs that would sort of help me out with stuff. Sometimes I'd also goof around. Those of you who are about my age, I'm about to show a very scary image. All right, 1978, flashbacks here. Who knows what that is? It's a Cylon, 1978. So here's the thing. I also teach at the university here, and technical writing, and we have a user interface element that goes back and forth when it doesn't know how long the process is going to take. And so I told my students that just while we're waiting for this to run, it takes 20 seconds to run. So just FYI, that user interface element is called a Cylon. It can also be a Knight Rat thing. It's also the Larson scanner, exactly, because he was involved in both shows. But I said this thing about Cylon, and like everybody in the room like looks at me like I just said something extremely weird, and I'm like, well, I don't expect you would have seen the 1978 show, but probably the reboot. And they're like, no. You were all 3 years. They were all 3 years old by the time that went off the air. So yeah, there's some generational things there. And so this was just a little program that goes back and forth, making a Cylon. And so different ways to kind of just sort of play around with DOS. Sometimes they're impressive and sometimes they're just kind of goofing off. Little Christmas tree program and things like that. These are all things actually, I have a YouTube channel about FreeDOS, and I wrote both of those programs as part of that YouTube channel. And so it's just a really interesting, fast way to write applications, and I wrote lots of different programs to support me, to extend the command line, and to do all kinds of different work. I lived in DOS in the 1980s and the 1990s as an undergraduate student. I also actually, by the way, discovered Linux about 1993. That was when the kernel was not even the 1.0 yet. And I really liked it. I actually dual booted Linux and DOS. I had to dual boot because Linux didn't have any applications really to speak of. It was all very much command line. So if you wanted to write a paper, you're booting back into DOS. You want to run a spreadsheet, you're booting back into DOS, but you can do a lot of other stuff in Linux at the time. And of course, if I wanted to have some downtime, of course, I would do what every DOS user did, which I'd play these various DOS games, right? And so, yeah, I know, yeah, right? I mean, that's Doom on the left, classic Doom. Anybody know the one on the right? Who, what? Nope, not quite. Keen, Commander Keen, yes, with his, wearing his older brother's helmet from the Green Bay Packers, and that was going on a little adventure on Mars. And so, this is, how I lived DOS, and I just loved DOS in the 1980s, 1990s. I was aware of Windows, and this is what Windows looked like in 1994.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. And, it didn't really change from version 1 to version 3. This is version 3.11. It really hadn't changed much. I mean, version 1 couldn't even have overlapping windows, but, it didn't really change much. It was extremely slow. It was very fragile. Even 3.11 for workgroups was actually still pretty fragile. If you had a misbehaving application, it could actually take down all of Windows. And so it's with this perspective of having this enthusiasm and enjoying working with DOS in the 80s and 90s and this bad experiences running Windows that I didn't have a very good reaction. In late 93, early 94, when you start seeing announcements from Microsoft say, well, not announcements, but interviews in trade press that we're going to be, the next version of Windows won't use DOS. DOS is dead. DOS will be dead very, very soon. And I'm like, oh, man. If the next version of Windows is anything like, if Windows 4, Windows 3.2 is anything like Windows 3.1, I don't want anything to do with it. And I'm like, I'd already been running Linux. And so I asked around, has anybody created an open source version of DOS? And people said, that's a great idea. You should do that. Sort of the time frame here, by the way, just to kind of put some things into perspective. So, in May is when you really started to see lots of trade stuff coming out. Back in also May, just for perspective, that's when Star Trek: The Next Generation stopped airing. Yeah, great show. That's how old it is. Picard was no more. May. And so then you started seeing also in May into June a lot of trade press stuff around DOS is dead, right? No more MS-DOS. The next version of Windows will not need DOS at all, which actually probably turned out to be Windows 95, and it wasn't that bad. But yeah, no more DOS. Also for perspective, The Lion King came out, the first one, the original. The week before I said, let's make our own version of DOS. Like Lion King was in theaters at the time. And so that was June 29 is when I said, let's make our own DOS. By the way, that was about a week before Amazon became a thing. You could not shop online by the time we had announced FreeDOS. By the way, anybody like the show Friends? Yep, that hadn't aired yet. Okay, so June 29, 1994, there was, the way that you talked about things online was you went to news groups. And so there was a news group called Comp OS MS-DOS Apps, where lots of people talked about DOS apps. There's another one for developers and things like that. But I happened to announce it here, where I was talking about, back in probably, May, probably, April, it was like, hey, open source DOS. And people were like, that's a great idea. No, there's no open source DOS. You should do it. And I was like, how hard can it be? The nice thing about not being a computer science student was I had this frosty glasses of naivety. I mean, I didn't know how hard it might be, and which actually allows you to do stuff when you don't know how hard it might be. And so I announced June 29, 1994, let's make our own version of DOS. And that's where it started, over 30 years ago. Now, over time, I've learned about how to maintain that community. FreeDOS is still, in 2025, a thing. People are still working on FreeDOS. We still have releases that we make. We released 1.4, feels like not that long ago. We have a monthly test release that we do. That just came out a couple days ago. There's a mailing list with a small but active community. We have a FreeDOS Facebook group. other places, right? And I mentioned I have a YouTube channel, and we try to maintain community, kind of keep the community together. 30 years is a long time for any open source software project, especially one about DOS. And so I feel like I've got a couple of things that I've learned here and there about maintaining a community. And so one is, it's more than just the code, right? Open source software, yes, is code, but it's more than just code. People are going to come to you with ideas. And what I've learned, by watching people, by making my own mistakes, if somebody comes to you with an idea and you're like, nope, hang on, that's not the vision. You basically have killed a community member. That person's not going to contribute to you at all. We had a discussion not too long ago on our list about somebody wanted to add this updated program. And I was like, they're like, what do you think, Jim? Can I do that? I'm like, I'm not the gatekeeper to that. Go for it. If you want to try that, I think go for it, right? I try to maintain openness. If you have an idea, everyone can contribute. You don't actually have to have years and years of DOS programming experience. You can just jump right in, right? Ideas can come from anywhere. Keep people engaged, right? That's another way, another thing that you need to have. If you're going to maintain an open source software community for this long, you need to keep people engaged. And so that means you need to share updates. You need to share new versions, right? People are going to be making new versions of their programs. They're excited to be part of the community. They're going to want to release a program. And the best way to shut down that community is to be like, cool, and then not do anything with it, right? And so you have to have, I'm going to talk in a second about, you have to have a website, but share that, announce that, celebrate it, right? That's the best way to say thank you to somebody, is to release it, right? Oh, here's some code that I did that has improved your program. Wrap it up, put it together, make a release, right? That's how you keep people engaged. If you get a patch from somebody and you're going to wait months to do anything with it, you've really put the brakes in that community. So recognize people by releasing, taking what they have, find a way to say yes, right? And encourage people to contribute by keeping people engaged. You do have to maintain a website, right? A website is definitely something you have to have. I'm a consultant as well, and so I learned when I became a consultant this lesson that I'm going to share with you, which is that you have to have a website. It doesn't have to be a great website, and that's key, right? Having a website is key. You have to have a home base, right? There has to be somewhere that people can go to learn more about you and about your project. And that's why having a website is important. It has to be maintained. I'm not saying every day there's got to be a new thing, but you do have to keep it maintained. You have to keep it relevant because people need to find information there. We've also, by the way, just done, because I also teach some stuff at the university, as I said, we also do usability testing on our website because there's a usability class that we work with. We've improved the website because it's very interesting. It's very hard to maintain, I'm just going to make this comment, it's very hard to maintain a website about a 30-year-old operating system when you've got people who are going to be discovering you who were not alive when DOS was even a product. And they're discovering this because they probably heard about it through a computer science class or something, and they really don't know much about DOS. And they're trying to learn about DOS through your website, and what are some things that I can do with it? I got emails from people that said, I've installed FreeDOS. How do I use it? I'm like, ooh, wow, didn't expect that one to come up. So the website has to have information about things that you can do, things that, how you can use it, things like that, right? It doesn't have to be great. It has to be usable. It has to be a home base. Share great news, right? When things happen, you need to get that out there. That's like marketing 101. How do you get the information out there? And so different ways that you can do that I've enjoyed doing is one is I share videos on YouTube. I tried to do that weekly. For a long time I was able to do it weekly. things are a little busy right now, so I haven't done stuff weekly. But we do have a YouTube channel where people can get engaged, sort of follow what's going on with FreeDOS. I'll kind of highlight some different programs that people have written for FreeDOS, some of my favorite DOS programs, share that enthusiasm. During the pandemic, when the pandemic was really big, I actually ran a tutorial on how to do DOS programming in C. And so if you want to learn how to do DOS programming in C, you can go watch that series. But also write articles. That's something I like to do as well. And so I actually had an article published this morning in All Things Open and about FreeDOS. And so it's how you get information out there. The more you share, the more visible your project will become, right? Get information out there by sharing videos, by writing articles about it, speaking about it to conferences, and that's how you kind of get people to hear about you and get engaged with you. Maintain open communication. Also, I would say critical. Maybe I should have had this one as an earlier slide. It's such a critical thing. Communication has to be open. It has to be public. I always try to tell people, please don't have off-list conversations. People email me individually, and I'm like, put that back on the list, right? So we've got several email lists. We have 2 email lists now. One is for users, and so if you are curious about how DOS works and how FreeDOS works, you're having trouble installing it, whatever, we have a list dedicated for that, email list dedicated for that. And we do get questions on there about how do I do this, how do I do that. We also have another one for developers. And that's where people ask questions about developing. I'm writing a program. I just discovered FreeDOS, and I'm trying to write this program. You'll see a lot of questions come up there. It's neither one of them is really high volume these days, but that is definitely where we communicate. We also have other discussion forums that we participate in. We have a Facebook group that is actually sort of kind of active. And so I think that works out pretty well. We also, during the pandemic, started doing these video get-togethers. Which has been, I thought it was just kind of a neat thing to do because everyone's knowing how Zoom works these days. And I'm like, well, we'll just do some get-togethers so that people can get to know each other as more than just an email address. Turned out to be extremely popular. After that first year, after 2020, I thought, well, I didn't think we were going to do any more in 2021. People were like, when's the next one? These are really good, right? So it turns out that's a really interesting way to maintain communication as well. We alternate our topics. We meet roughly once a month, and we alternate our focus. We'll do one meeting where it's about technical issues, where we do live debugging. Someone wants to go over something. And we'll do another one the month later that's meant to be just purely social time. And it's a great way to kind of hang out with each other. Number 6, keep it respectful, right? That's an important thing. Needs to have a code of conduct. I've been part of temporarily some other open source software projects that haven't had a code of conduct. People have started to say bad things on their forums, and then the moderators are just like, it's free speech. It kills the community. It kills the community if you do that. You have to have a code of conduct so that way people understand what is acceptable, what's not acceptable. We have 3 rules on ours. It's very, very simple. Basically, no spam, no bullying, keep it on topic. And that works out pretty well. We've only had to ban, if I were to count them out, probably it would be on one hand, the times we've had to do that. But it does make sure that we keep things, respectful. If you're not going to be respectful, that's not going to help the community, and so you need to maintain that open code of conduct. And then last, it is, of course, about the code as well, right? And so you need to use a recognized open source software license. I've watched other projects that have started up, and there's some other ones that, in retro computing communities, they've started to do different stuff, and they're not using a recognized open source software license. There are some people who are sort of anti-license, and are like, I'll write my own. And then somebody will do something with it, and they're like, that's not what I meant you to do with my code. I'm like, well, that's allowed in your license that you wrote. So did you want it to be included in some other thing with no source code? That wasn't in your license, right? So it's the best way to release something as open source software is to use a recognized open source software license. It's kind of surprising I have to say it in 2025, but I still do find people that try to do stuff kind of on their own. Also, by the way, pay attention to the other licenses that you're using in your project. Right? There's that software bill of materials, open source software bill of materials concept that you do need to know what other open source libraries and code that you're using. And not all licenses are compatible with one another. So you need to be careful of what things you're using versus and what's going to be allowed. But also, if you're going to be open source software, you really should be sharing stuff early and often, right? People are like, oh, it's not ready for release yet. I'm going to share this sort of like with a couple of people so they can test it. And I'm like, the best way to test it is to make it available to everybody. Let everybody see it. And if you think it's unstable, then put a big note on it that says unstable in the version tag. In fact, in the file name, I would probably even put the word unstable. And then people know what they're getting into, right? And we maybe won't roll that into the monthly test release, but maybe we will if it's not something that's going to be critical. We probably wouldn't roll in an unstable kernel as the default kernel on our monthly release, but we would probably make that available as an alternative kernel that you could choose to install if you wanted to, because then you would know that if you're getting an unstable kernel. So share early and share often, right? Make frequent releases. If you go back and look at when FreeDOS was first starting, back in 1994, we had releases like weekly. I mean, we were putting out something like weekly. Here's the latest update. There were times that, as had a version control system finally, I was putting in stuff daily, multiple times a day. There'd be a release for something. Share early, share often. If you're not sure that something's going to be stable, put a note in it. Be careful about maybe being too frequent if you're making big announcements because people can't download the latest thing. There is eventually going to be a frequency at which is going to be optimum. And I would say these days, if you're releasing something more than a couple of days, more frequently than a couple of days apart, you probably want to think about what's being labeled as stable versus unstable. But in general, make frequent releases, right? Even if it's a small update. Is it worth making this version release? Yeah. If you want people to try it, I would say you should release it. And so think about making these frequent releases, even if it's a small update. So with that, I think we're kind of at time, or at least what I thought was on time. And so I'm going to kind of pause there and go for questions. If you want to follow up and ask me an email, there's my email address, jhall@freedos.org. I'll also mention I'm also a writer, and I have a new book coming out very soon, Technical Writing for Developers. It's about using Markdown and HTML. And we've released as part of the A-Press Pocket Guide series. This will be released, I think, on the 15th. But right now, I'll go to questions. We have a question over here.
Does FreeDOS have enterprise and commercial applications in retrofitting ancient software keeping it running?
So the question was, enterprise applications keeping things running? Turns out, yeah. Yeah, it turns out we actually do hear from people who run FreeDOS in a production mode. Last year, I actually talked with a guy who inherited his dad's wood CNC shop. And all of their machines, they have like 5 machines, all their machines run DOS. And his dad had updated all the machines to run FreeDOS. And so this guy had inherited it from his dad when his dad passed away. And he's like, my business runs on FreeDOS, and I have no idea how FreeDOS works. And so I had to kind of teach this guy how FreeDOS works. We've also seen other people doing other various things with FreeDOS. Not quite so much these days, but back in, the big popularity was like around 98, 99, 2000, 2001. And yeah, you could actually go like to the airport, and you could actually see, there was a time that I was there early in the morning, and I actually saw an airport, it was a small regional airport, that had the displays about arrivals and things. I actually watched it boot up, and there was the FreeDOS kernel message in there, and I was like, wow, I didn't expect, it came up too fast, I couldn't take a picture of it with it. There was a video that somebody also shared on YouTube of, it's either in Ukraine or Russia, and they, I'm sure not legally, got into one of those control stations for a rail line, passenger rail, and booted the machine that was in there, which if you pause at just the right minute, it disappears so fast. But if you pause at just the right minute, you can actually see the FreeDOS kernel message come up on this machine. It was a Dell machine, and you could just see it barely pops up before it comes into the graphical application, because what it was actually doing was displaying messages or playing messages or distributing messages to the different rail cars on the line. And so this is, I'm not saying that like this is a big critical feature, but it was basically like the recorded messages for like, we're going to have a change in service, scheduled service after December 1st or something like that. It was like those kinds of messages is what I understood it was. But yeah, you actually do see people that were running FreeDOS in some sort of production capacity. The coolest one, well, there are two of them that were really cool. One of them was a guy at NASA who never told me what he did with it. But there is a guy at NASA who at one point was running FreeDOS for something. That was cool. Another one was somebody made and sold pinball machines back in the early 2000s that ran FreeDOS to manage the display on the back of the machine. He obviously wouldn't tell me how the specifics worked, but the only way I could imagine that would like work really, really well is if like every bumper and every little target on the thing was like registering a keystroke. That's the only thing I could write an application for that today. But I mean, that was really cool to watch that happen. So yeah, you actually do find people that run FreeDOS today. Yeah.
I imagine you're familiar with Bill Gates' memoir that just came out, and it ends right on the edge of that era where he's creating DOS. Have you read that, and have you had any engagement with Bill Gates? It seems to be very nostalgic at this point. I'm curious if he's a member of your Facebook.
I haven't. So yeah, the question was about Bill Gates and his memoir that came out recently, for example. And you know, I haven't read the memoir. I'm aware of it, source code, so I'm aware that it was out there. I don't know that he's used FreeDOS. I have actually tried to reach out to him a couple of times to do an interview, which I thought would be really cool. And he has obviously ghosted me. There's no way he's going to respond to that. But when we did start FreeDOS way back in 1994, I got an email from somebody with a Microsoft.com email address saying, "You don't know what you're doing. This is so stupid. The next version of Windows will blow you away." So there was somebody at Microsoft that obviously probably shouldn't have sent that email. I'm sure their boss was very happy about that. But no, I've never actually talked to like Bill Gates or anybody in official capacity about it. Yeah.
Okay, I love that you mentioned new features and releases because that's a great way to keep open sources relevant.
Mm-hmm.
But my question is, as you imagine the next generation of FreeDOS, is there anything that you'd retain or reinvent? Are there any new releases or extensions that you would consider incorporating, or even drivers?
We are always looking at things that we can do in FreeDOS. So the question was about the next version of FreeDOS and kind of always thinking about new versions. And there's no like roadmap for what the next version has to entail. But we are always looking at what's out there, what's coming new. And so there's a kernel update that Jeremy, our developer, has been working on to provide compatibility to run Windows for Workgroups on FreeDOS, which is kind of cool. That might be a big enough deal that we'd probably make it FreeDOS 2.0, what the next distribution would be. But otherwise, we don't really have like a roadmap. What we did when we did FreeDOS 1.4 is we realized that there had been a long enough time since 1.3 had come out, and we'd seen YouTube videos from YouTubers saying, "Oh, FreeDOS is cool, but it doesn't do this, it doesn't do that," and we're like, "Oh no, it totally does that now. That's been fixed for a while." I'm like, "Oh, we should just make a new version." And that actually is what drove the 1.4. It wasn't like, "Oh, we have to make a thing." It was just like, actually, you know what? We actually have some new features. Like with the new feature that showed up in 1.4 was now you can emulate on a modern machine a Sound Blaster, classic Sound Blaster, which you couldn't do before. And so now you can do it. There's a package called SBEMU. Yes. Wow, I did not expect this many questions about DOS, by the way. This is kind of cool.
Are you gonna like integrate DOS with like an AI system eventually, like LLM or something?
Integrate DOS with AI. I know we have a lot of AI talks here. I got to tell you, the FreeDOS mailing list is not very open to AI. In the retro computing community, you tend not to get a lot of AI stuff, so I don't think we're going to see AI pop up. If you want to add it, that door is open. You want to do a DOS program that'll do that, absolutely. Back there.
Going off that, I actually had two questions. One on AI ethics. So the open source community is not necessarily happy about AI, because you built all this stuff and then AI has been trained on your code. I was wondering if you could comment on your feelings about that. And second, about the accuracy of FreeDOS versus security. So like, how much do you prioritize the accuracy of FreeDOS versus how much do you prioritize the security of it?
Let me answer that second question first about the accuracy and security of FreeDOS. Because that's an easy one to answer. It's also, to me, kind of amusing. So the accuracy, obviously, we put a huge priority on accuracy. If it doesn't run DOS applications, it's not really DOS. So we definitely go for accuracy. If there's a great way to do it, and there's the DOS way to do it, we do it the DOS way, as ugly as it might be. So we absolutely put a priority on that. Security, since 1981 when DOS came out, there's been a local user gains root issue with DOS, which is that if you boot the machine, you're now root. We can't get rid of that. That's part of the nature of DOS. So in terms of security, there's really nothing you can really do. DOS is not really even a full operating system. And so a process can read memory from anywhere in the system. There's no safeguards on that. So in terms of that level of security, that's not something that I don't think you're ever going to see in any DOS application. There was another question, though, about AI and sort of I think it was the ethics of AI and sort of my opinions on that. I'll try to be brief. I may have a different opinion than other people in open source. My view is that if you release software under an open source software license, it allows people to look at that source code, and they can study it. And so whether or not it's a person viewing that source code or a computer program viewing that source code, in my view, that's about pretty much the same thing. The license allows that. So I can't get upset if somebody takes our code and puts it into an AI system. The problem ends up being if you're using that trained data and using it to create another program, that becomes a derived work. And so there's a license issue that has not been captured in AI in training it on the stuff that went in. And so if, a lot of the stuff that we have in FreeDOS is under the GNU General Public License, which says that if you have a derived work from that, it also has to be under the GNU General Public License, GNU GPL. You can't ask AI, it would be unethical to have AI generate some code for you that's been trained on FreeDOS and it generates some code that came from FreeDOS, and then take that code and make it proprietary, for example, worst case scenario. Or to say, oh, this looks trivial because it's DOS, and so I'll just release it under an MIT license. Well, that's against the license as well. And I have actually seen, not FreeDOS, but I write a lot of articles about kind of getting people introduced into technology. I think, based on time, I think I probably should end here. But I write a lot of questions about technology, especially about kind of getting people into technology and like programming. And in my articles, I will show how certain things work. Here's how the original nroff worked, for example. Here's how this worked, for example. Here's a little program that kind of shows how to do that. And I always say in those articles, this isn't the best way to do it. This actually may even have some unsafe code in it if you're going to hit some real corner cases, but it's the easiest to explain to somebody who hasn't done programming before. That has, I've seen, been used to train AI. And I know that because I've asked AI, because it's part of the course I teach in technical writing, I've asked it to write for me a sample version of nroff. And I recognize my code coming back out of that AI system, Copilot and Gemini. And I recognize the code. Copilot actually cited that it came from Technically Rewrite, which I thought was interesting. And what's scary is that code, I told you in my article, was going to be unsafe under certain circumstances. The AI does not. So you need to be super careful about AI in terms of how you're going to use it for vibe coding and things like that. There were a couple other questions. I'm going to pause. You clearly want to respond to that, but I'm going to pause. And if you got questions, hit me up later when we're done with the break. All right.